Hello, everybody. This is Jeff J. Brown in Beijing, China, for another 44 Days Radio Sinoland broadcast. This is a podcast of a very important article that I wrote on February 14th, 2015. The title of it is Behind the Great Western Firewall is the Ugly Truth. And it is would be very, very helpful if you look at the article on my website. This is for listening enjoyment purposes, and we will get started. It starts out with a quote that I wrote to begin the article, and it is, "A truth untold is a lie. A fact hidden is censorship." This is a plea to everyone reading that we Westerners had better wake up before it's too late. If we don't, we are going to continue to have many repetitions of Ukraine, Serbia, Georgia, Venezuela, Bolivia, Iraq, Iran, Syria, Afghanistan, Sudan, Libya, Mali, and the list goes on and on, non-stop. Since the Bolshevik Revolution in 1917, that was when the West's elites perceived a genuine global threat to the status quo of capitalism and their dominion over Earth's resources. Now, with the world becoming more multipolar than ever before, we come to China and Russia. As Western empire's decline accelerates, in desperation, America is trying to take down these two colossal civilizations. This even as Russia and China work openly and secretly to interlock their cooperation and resistance. It is clear that they are creating a unified front in the face of Western bellicosity. Yes, the United States is delusional and megalomaniac, but it's frightening to know that if carried to its logical conclusion, it will mean the end of humanity as we know it. A big part of this plea to my readers is for Westerners to quit using the mainstream media and start seeking out alternative news sources, as frustratingly fractured as they are, and to invest a modicum of time to do some research and investigation along the way. A good place to start would be all the hyperlinks below, and then take advantage of the list of resources at the end of this article. The other plea is to come to terms with just how evil and corrupt our Western governments and capital are, in spite of what we learned in school textbooks. All of our lives and future absolutely depend on it. You will see what I mean after reading this. An author friend of mine sent me a hyperlink about Hillary Clinton and her possible political downfall. This is due to America's decision to destroy Libya using France and the United Kingdom as proxies. It was also a major slap in the face to China and Russia, who did not veto the U.S.-led 2011 United Nations Security Council vote for a, quote, no-fly, end of quote, zone over Libya. No fly as in bombs away, baby, much like Slim Pickens' Major Kong riding Bronco in Dr. Strangelove. We know how this flagrant disregard for international law is playing out. Under the guise of humanitarian wars, the West pushes its fatuous, well-worn R2P, so-called responsibility to protect, to overthrow or at least control resource-rich governments. In reality, R2P really means the West's, quote, right to plunder, end of quote. According to this article series, Hillary apparently went over the heads of the Joint Chiefs of Staff and the CIA to push through the bloody regime change in Libya. I replied to my friend that given Americans' predilection to cheer on their government's slaughter and maiming of millions of dark-skinned, mostly Muslims across the planet, not to mention by current Kiev proxies thousands of fair-skinned Iranians as well, then surely this macho orchestration of Gaddafi's murder might actually help her win the White House. I then said that even if Queen Clinton is not the Democratic candidate, her replacement will be just another Wall Street Anglo-Zionist, Russophobe one-percenter. So what difference does it make? Think Joe Biden or John Kerry. His closing comment was that I was probably right, but he despises Bill and Hillary Clinton with a passion. That got me to pondering how much my thinking has evolved and grown in the last 5 years of living in China. In 2010, I thought Bill and Hillary were good leaders and capable politicians. I voted for Clinton twice and Obama the first time. By 2012, I futilely wrote in the Green Party presidential candidate on my Oklahoma ballot as my awareness of the truth was growing. But I still thought that Hillary would make a great president. Not anymore. Being a dual national that same year, I also voted for François Hollande, thinking that he, as a so-called socialist, would be different than mini-me Nicolas W. Sarkozy. Wrong again. And if I have to, I'll write in a name on my ballot for France's election in 2017. Working as a school teacher affords me a lot of personal time. We work about 190 days a year, and I can usually leave my professional life on campus, so I have my evenings and weekends to myself. As a result, since 2010, I've spent thousands of hours writing books, columns, and more importantly, doing the necessary research to generate my work as accurately and as truthfully as possible. It is this massive amount of investigation that has opened my eyes about how the world really works. Especially revealing has been the West in its 500 years of brutal colonialism, with its exploitation of our planet's human and natural resources. The myth is that the West has nobly done all this in the name of progress and the pursuit of knowledge, but the impetus has been and continues to be profit, empire, and global domination. To legitimize it all in the eyes of its citizens, throw in God, country, and king. Voila, the annals of history as told by the princes of power. The second thing that happened these last few days was an exchange of emails with another writer friend of mine. This time it was to congratulate them for having an article published in a heavyweight American newspaper. In their article, they forcefully condemned a communist country's use of censorship to control its version of history. To get published in this newspaper is quite an achievement. It is one of those news sources which is so well respected that if they print something, it's the truth. And if they don't write about an event happening in the world, it never occurred. So my friend can now stake claim as a mainstream, quote, maid, end of quote, woe man in the news establishment world. And I am truly happy for them and their success. It is a dream that many a writer and journalist fantasize doing. Yes, this communist country's censorship is more overt compared to what I like to call the West's Great Western Firewall, abbreviated GWF. But the aims and results are identical. Why do countries like Cuba, China, Vietnam, North Korea, Iran, Venezuela, Ecuador, and countless others not have faith in the West's tried and true Great Western Firewall, where the state and capital know that merely controlling the mainstream media is enough to define what is true, not true, what happened and didn't happen? That the alternative media is too diffuse, too fractured, and ultimately only constitutes feeble background noise, attenuated over time. The difference is that for 80% of the world's people and their governments, they have been the victim of 5 centuries of Western colonialism and exploitation. And these countries continue to be ceaselessly assailed by so-called Western, quote, civil society, end of quote, and, quote, democracy, end of quote, NGOs. to effect psyops, destabilization, and ultimately regime change through assassination, coups, and armed uprisings, not to mention the economic and social predations of the IMF and the World Bank, especially if they have valuable natural resources and/or strategic locations. With these examples of our, quote, superior, end of quote, Western virtues and civilization trying to tear the 80% countries apart, one can empathize with their belief that they need to be more controlling and heavy-handed than maybe they would like to be. Being the aggressor and not the victim, the West plays by a different, privileged set of rules. For 500 years, the West has, had, and continues to own the copyright to the human race's history books and current events. From the majority's perspective, their histories have been written for them by the West against their will. These countries must battle against this massive, distorting prism of perceived reality, which helps explain their sometimes obsessive nature about trying to fashion their own pasts. A long time ago, I had a girlfriend who had been savagely raped at a young age. She kept a loaded pistol in her purse 24/7, even taking it to the bathroom, and slept with it under her pillow. She was paranoid and trusting of nobody, even in our intimate relationship. Can't say that I blame her. And she reminds me of China, Vietnam, Cuba, and all the rest of the 80% of the people of the world who have been and continue to be savagely raped during 500 years of Western colonialism. Like my old friend, I can sympathize with their paranoia and lack of trust. In any case, the West can be just as heavy-handed at censorship as these more criticized countries. Westerners who criticize Baba Beijing, my wry name for China's communist leadership, who criticize Baba Beijing for setting up thousands of social media accounts to help control the official government narrative, don't realize that their governments spend billions doing exactly the same thing. If you think all those thousands of comment trolls who haunt mainstream and alternative websites across the planet work for free, think again. I have learned over the last 4.5 years that my friends' mainstream acceptance can sometimes come at a cost. They replied to another email I had sent. My original email contained a link for an article that explained the background history of this very same communist country that my friend wrote about. The revelations in this article that I sent were written by a non-establishment journalist who researches Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, released documents, WikiLeaks, testimonies, court documents, interviews, etc., and has contacts in the dark, dank netherworld of spydom. I was very surprised to get back a reply from my writer friend saying that this investigative journalist is, quote, a nutcase conspiracy theorist, end of quote. I wanted to reply to this wry post that I wasn't sure who was sending it, the friend I've known for 30 years or the one who wrote the article for that high-powered establishment newspaper. I joked to myself, saying maybe they wrote it knowing that the NSA and America's 15 other spy agencies would store a copy for future reference. Alvin Toffler said, "The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn." Being outside of the West for the last 4.5 years has afforded me the opportunity to leave the Matrix and its iron-fisted control of the Washington, London, Paris consensus. As a born scientist, I am in a never-ending quest for the truth, as uncomfortable as it may be to discover. All my research has allowed me the luxury of unlearning and relearning humanity's ancient and modern history, up to our resulting current events. I am not sure if I were still living in the West, if I could have broken my brainwashed chains and set myself free from the bondage of its suffocating conventional narrative. I worked in the corporate world for 25 years before becoming a teacher. Like most all of us, I felt compelled to spout, quote, the imperial party line, end of quote, of the West's tightly scripted version of history and current events. In fact, until 2010, I still believe much of it was true. Conformity is society's most powerful control mechanism. Those who don't go along to get along can pay a very heavy price. Just ask Malcolm X, John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King, Oscar Romero, Gandhi, Che Guevara, the 4 American nuns raped and killed in El Salvador, Jesus Christ, and millions of other less well-known martyrs whose lives were and still are being cut short or imprisoned, beaten, raped, tortured, bankrupted, ostracized, or made stateless or jobless. Just in the last week alone are the cases of Sam al-Aryan, Barrett Brown, and Mohammed Ould Salhi's Guantanamo Diary, which brilliantly leaves in line after line of blacked-out text, pages and pages of censored truth. Makes you proud to be an American, doesn't it? There are many multitudes like them who are ignored by the mainstream media, and we know that if they are not objectively reported on in the New York Times, Washington Post, or on CNN and Fox, then they don't exist and they don't matter. As I wrote in a Reflections in Sinoland column, it takes courage to leave the matrix and seek the truth. For the multitudes who escape martyr status, sacrifices still often have to be made, both professional and personal. Rejection and ridicule by the vast majority, who is still ensconced in the mainstream propaganda bubble, are commonplace. It means being labeled a conspiracy theorist. In reality, though, it is those in the matrix who are the real conspiracy nuts for trying to rationalize and justify the world that they are selectively presented in the suffocating cocoon of the Great Western Firewall. Baba Beijing has its just as ruthless and controlling Great Firewall of China, and the outcomes are identical. Only the methodology is different. The big difference is that most Chinese know their information is censored. Most Westerners obediently believe that they have, quote, freedom of the press, end of quote, and that censorship is everybody else's problem. Sadly, Westerners are deluded, gullible, and easily manipulated. But this has been true for all citizens of empire since the dawn of civilization. It is hard to accept and very disillusioning to realize just how irredeemably corrupt and evil are the West's supposedly democratic systems and the political and business leaders who own the process. All my thousands of hours of extensive research confirm this, and nothing surprises me anymore, especially that false flag operations are not the exception, but the banal norm of imperial national governments. They most certainly have been the weapon of choice since the first civilizations in Sumer, China, India, and Africa, and they continue at a fast and furious pace in current events. There is this article here lists many false flags that governments have admitted to or were exposed by FOIA laws while they last. Hyperlink is in the article. False flags routinely change the course of human history. Let's remember that Maidan in Ukraine was a classic false flag, and since then, at least weekly, the West is launching one after another there, which has brought our planet to the threshold of World War III. False flags are ingrained in the DNA of empire to control and manipulate their subjects. Empire keeps on perpetrating false flags relentlessly because they are so ruthlessly successful at achieving their aims. False flags brilliantly create mass fear and uncertainty among the people, and justify the persecution of the group to be dehumanized for exploitation or destruction. The shock and awe of false flags allow governments and capital to herd the masses like sheep people, to induce them to gleefully go to war, commit genocide, accept economic servitude, and environmentally destructive resource extraction, while willfully renouncing their free will to the tyranny of fascism and oligarchy for, quote, security and safety, end of quote. It's been working like a charm since 5000 BC and will undoubtedly continue to work because of all our embedded social memes for group survival and evolutionary genes for individual survival. At the end of the day, in spite of our, quote, superior, end of quote, intelligence, we as a species are not much better than a herd of gazelle or a colony of ants. Unless we get smart and get involved, it brings me to a frightening conclusion. False flags will continue unabated until they cause the demise of the human race. To put the challenge before us in perspective, here are a few recent cases going back in time. Remember, like Sherlock Holmes, in order to crack a crime caper, it is only necessary to disprove one of the alibis. After that, the whole tissue of lies falls apart. Charlie Hebdo. The whole thing stinks to high heaven. Even my Parisian wife was raising her eyebrows. How could they get so many thousands of matching Je suis Charlie t-shirts on people and color placards in their hands for mass television exposure immediately after the incident? A supposed terrorist just happened to leave their ID card in the getaway car? This is as laughable as Saddam al-Suqami's fake passport supposedly found in the molten rubble of the 9/11 Twin Towers, which the FBI then conveniently lost. When even the mainstream media had the temerity to question its validity. But it was enough to, quote, identify, end of quote, the supposed 9/11 perpetrators immediately after the supposed attack. Ditto Charlie Hebdo. My extensive research shows that one of the key components of successful false flags is to imprint in the minds of the sheeple exactly who the perpetrators are as soon as it happens, almost like embedding a social meme across the population. If the sheeple are given any time at all to think about it and ask questions, then the false flag can easily fail. Thus, the 9/11-19, Lee Harvey Oswald, James Earl Ray, Sirhan, the communists who burned down the Reichstag, the Spanish who, quote, blew up supposedly the USS Maine, the North Vietnamese who, quote, attacked the USS Maddox in the Gulf of Tonkin, the supposed Boston bombers, Bomber Brothers, Tsarnaev, and on, were clearly and convincingly identified by the authorities within hours of the false flags. Surely Nero loudly accused the Christians as soon as his arsonists set fire to Rome while sending out crisis actors to dramatize these followers' perfidy. He not only got his grand palace, for which the Roman senators were refusing to give, and the now burned neighborhood's land to build it, but Nero also got to kill thousands of Christians in the process. The hallmarks of a truly successful false flag. A few hours of research on Charlie Hebdo makes it glaringly apparent that the deep state was involved. The film footage of a police officer supposedly shot in the head at point blank while lying on the sidewalk was quickly extirpated by the mainstream media. With millions of views on YouTube in just 2 days, it was censored. In the West, our masters have learned that the alternative press is like low-grade interference. It is too scattered and diffuse to cause critical mass. But when something like the censored Charlie Hebdo hoax assassination goes viral in a matter of hours, then it can become a threat to the official narrative and often gets censored. On alternative websites, this film clip is still there. Break out the popcorn and beer, boys and girls, and watch crisis actors help dupe the world. The link is provided in the article. The shooter supposedly blasts a bullet at point-blank range into the cop's head with a high-powered machine gun, yet there is no blood and the, quote, victim's head stays intact. Had he really been shot, his skull would have exploded like a gangrenous pumpkin. He wasn't shot at all. So a combat-trained, quote, terrorist just happens to miss his target from centimeters away. Yet all the mainstream media are lined up with their propaganda, saying a police officer was viciously assassinated by the so-called terrorists, while lying helplessly wounded on the sidewalk. Later, a Star News reporter had a colossal slip of the tongue and stated that the fake blood was put on the ground after the fact, which is obviously true. And it goes on. The supposed hostage taker, Amadi Coulibaly, at a surprise, surprise, Jewish grocery store, was obviously already handcuffed when he was practically pushed outside into a hail of fire. I wonder what his handler inside was telling him in his final moments. We'll never know because dead men don't talk. Neither can his supposed Charlie Hebdo shooter partners, the Kouachi brothers, who got cut to pieces the same day. Speaking of important dead witnesses, there was the top cop, Elric Fredoux, investigating the Charlie Hebdo hoax. Let me see if I got this right. The day after the false flag, late at night, while he was writing his report, Fredoux, quote, commits suicide, end of quote. Whatever he was writing was surely destroyed on the spot. The biggest case of his life, one of the great cases of the decade, and he offs himself? Yeah, sure. My research shows that deadly accidents, sudden fatal illnesses, and suicides happen inordinately often in false flags. Funny how it works out that way. This very important story was largely censored in the West. There is another Charlie Hebdo story that the West highly censored. A third suspect, Hamid Morad, turned himself in, declaring that he had an unassailable ally. He was in class at high school. Alternative media reported this faithfully, but I only found the Daily Telegraph, which reported that Morad had an alibi. The rest of the mainstream media Ministry of Truth omitted this key fact, leaving everyone with the impression that he turned himself in because he was guilty. The Washington Post, January 7th. The headline says, Charlie Hebdo suspect said to surrender. 2 others at large after Paris terror attack. Die Welt in Germany. 1 suspect has turned himself in to police in connection with Wednesday's massacre at the offices of Parisian satirical magazine Charlie Hebdo. ABC News, January 7th. Youngest suspect in Charlie Hebdo attack turns himself in. CNN, January 8th. Citing sources, the Agence France Presse news agency reported that an 18-year-old suspect in the attack has surrendered to police. This is not coincidental. There is a concerted effort by the mainstream media to act as ventriloquist dummies on TV and marionettes in the newsroom to do the bidding for the West's elite owners. The mainstream media is riddled with CIA agents and, quote, intelligence, end of quote, NOCs, which are called means non-official covers, of all stripes to help keep everybody singing in unison. A journalist with the courage to spill the beans has turned this truth into a bestseller in Germany. Former CIA Director William Casey was just stating the obvious when he went on record saying, quote, the Central Intelligence Agency owns everyone of any significance in the major media, end of quote. There are many, many videos on the internet exposing the Charlie Hebdo false flag. Here's a French SWAT member opening machine gun fire into the backs of his comrades, obviously shooting blanks. Here's another cop setting off an explosion in the middle of a swarm of cops surrounding him. Had it been a real stun grenade, everybody around him would have been floored by the percussion wave. You can compare all these videos to an, quote, official mainstream NBC video to see how the latter one has been expertly edited to excise all the incriminating evidence. Winston Smith in 1984's Oceana would feel right at home in the West's, quote, newsrooms, end of quote, as history is cut, pasted, and censored to the requisites of Big Brother. Just like my friend lambasted a communist country for censorship, the West works tirelessly to control its past too. Apparently, in false flags, there is a psychological slip of the tongue where crisis actors can't help but smile or smirk when they get in front of the camera for the joy of fooling the world. It's called duping delight, and this website has cataloged a bunch of them. Even the Million Man March in Paris, supposedly led by the defiant leaders of the, quote, free world, was a hoax. Benjamin Netanyahu is waving to nobody. Who needs Kim Jong-un? Heck, he probably gets his best ideas from his Western counterparts. Nobody does censorship and propaganda better than Westerners do. After all, they've been writing the playbook for 500 years. As all false flags are used to manipulate the masses after the fact, it is happening in spades thanks to Charlie Hebdo. France's authorities, and thus their mainstream media marionettes, are already talking about how Charlie Hebdo is France's 9/11, and the government will be passing a Patriot Act law like the United States. Sayonara to liberté, fraternité, égalité. You can kiss your quiche Lorraine goodbye, mes chers. Say hello to indefinite imprisonment, black sites for torture, and murder. SWAT teams and military weaponized police replacing cops on the beat, shooting first and asking questions later, while committing what used to be illegal search and seizure. My fellow French citizens, welcome to Anglo-Land's New World Order. Kafka, who was a fellow European, remember? It's reality imitating art. It keeps on keeping on. Just Google, quote, crisis actors Boston bombing, end of quote, and you will see real actors pretending to be injured. The hoax double amputee Jeff Bauman is photoed after supposedly losing both legs, conscious and sitting up with a phony tourniquet that is loose. The joke is on us. I've worked on major movie sets numerous times in France and China, and all the photos and this video look like, well, a movie set. One lady has been interviewed on international TV for at least 3 different, quote, terrorist acts, end of quote, and has apparently even been identified. There are many videos showing similar actors before and after the supposed bombing. Also, the private, quote, security, end of quote, contractors near where the supposed bombs went off, dressed identically like the 2 Patsy Sarayev brothers, replete with carbon copy oversized backpacks, is a nice touch. They were from the company owned and operated at the time by Chris Kyle of American Assassin movie fame, who has mercifully been put out of his psychopathic misery. If you believe the official Hollywood version of 9/11, you are saying on that day the natural laws of physics, chemistry, gravity, and matter were supernaturally suspended. You are insisting that Newton, Einstein, Bohr, Planck, Lavoisier, Mendeleev, and all the foundations of science did not apply that morning in New York City and Washington, D.C. No, it was pure Harry Potter. You are claiming that for the first time ever, 815 degrees centigrade burning jet fuel melted thousands of tons of steel. Steel that has a melting point of 1,510 degrees Celsius. That's more fantastic than alchemy. You are claiming that tens of thousands of massive, bolted, welded, riveted steel I-beams, girders, piers, and supports just miraculously gave away like hot butter and collapsed at nearly the same rate as an object falling off the Leaning Tower of Pisa. And not just the two 110-story twin towers, but WTT-7, which wasn't hit by an airplane. Yet this massive 52-story skyscraper, 226 meters or 743 feet, went down in free fall in 6 seconds flat. If you had jumped off the top when WTT-7 began to collapse, you would have hit the ground at the same time as the top of its roof did. The most likely source of this rapid destruction is the material thermite, which is commonly used for the controlled demolition of steel buildings. Independent investigators also found pools and puddles of still molten steel several days after the supposed terrorist attacks. Thermite can heat up hardened steel and keep it that hot for so long. Otherwise, the steel would have cooled off much quicker. The other possibility is micronuclear devices were used. Russian intelligence has apparently been discreetly releasing information showing that it was Mossad of Israel that organized the controlled demolitions. This would explain why so many first responders were irradiated with beta wave energy. Either way, thermite or micronuclear devices, the 3 WTC skyscrapers were not brought down by 19 Arabs with box cutters. Again, you have to suspend the natural laws of the universe to swallow the guffaw official story about the Pentagon being hit by a Boeing 757. This was a plane with a 38-meter wingspan, 124 feet wide, still carrying 32,000 liters, 8,600 gallons of highly flammable jet fuel in its wings, and 2 massive jet engines, along with its 47-meter-long, 155 feet fuselage, plowing into the outside of the building at several hundred miles per hour. Miraculously, that 38-meter wide fuel-filled wingspan supposedly left only a narrow 19-meter gash in the Pentagon. Plane wreckage and debris just magically disappeared. No dead bodies, no luggage, no plane seats. It all just evaporated into thin air like bewitched. Just as damning, all those supposedly 32,000 liters of burning jet fuel did not rage into a towering ball of inferno for hours on end. Nope, all the contents of the offices right next to where the supposed 115-ton plane careened at flight speed into the Pentagon were still sitting there. Desks, computers, file cabinets, chairs, even papers and documents were miraculously still sitting on tops of desks right where the fiery, quote, crash supposedly occurred. A security camera accidentally caught the explosion on film, and that massive 757 jetliner never enters the picture, although it looks like possibly a missile on the right came in low for the strike, if it was not blown up from inside. That could also explain the damage done. But a 757? No way. Where I grew up in Oklahoma, we are fond of saying that you can't stuff 10 pounds of manure in a 5-pound bag. Well, you can't slam a 38-meter wide jetliner into a 19-meter hole. A lesson in just how efficient the Great Western Firewall censorship works. This CNN news report, right after the supposed terrorist attack, stated the obvious, that there was no airplane. How many times was this aired? Once. Never to be seen or heard again. As far as the infamous heroes who fought those nasty, quote, terrorists on Flight UA-93, heck, even a major production Hollywood movie was made about the phantom plane crash. This local Fox affiliate news clip also only saw the light of public viewing one time before it was cut and censored from the history books by the Great Western Firewall. China, Cuba, Vietnam, North Korea, and the rest of the world can only smile in admiration for a memory hole job well done. The supposed crash site of the heroic UA-93 flight in rural Pennsylvania was nothing more than a small hole and a little debris planted ahead of time. No plane fuselage, no wings, no jet engines, no dead bodies, no luggage, no flotsam from the supposed fiery crash. 3 people on the site right after the mythical crash said, "This crash was different. There was no wreckage, no bodies, and no noise." That was the Somerset County coroner, Wallace Miller. "I was looking for anything that said tail, wing, plane, metal. There was nothing." Photographer Scott Spangler. "I was amazed because it did not in any way, shape, or form look like a plane crash." That was Patrick Madigan, commander of the Somerset Barracks of the Pennsylvania State Police. And then there is just the absurd impossibility of the whole outrageous lie. To quote Paul Craig Roberts, "In the most tightly controlled airspace on planet Earth, according to the official story, a handful of Arabs, mainly Saudi Arabians, operating independently of any government and competent intelligence service, men without James Bond and V for Vendetta capabilities, outwitted not only the CIA, FBI, and National Security Agency, but all 16 U.S. intelligence agencies, along with all security agencies of America's NATO allies and Israel's Mossad. Not only did the entire intelligence forces of the Western world fail, but on the morning of the attack, the entire apparatus of the national security state simultaneously failed. Airport security failed 4 times in 1 hour. NORAD failed. Air traffic control failed. The U.S. Air Force failed. The National Security Council failed. Dick Cheney failed. Absolutely nothing worked. The world's only superpower, was helpless at the humiliating mercy of a few undistinguished Arabs. All of this is just the tip of the iceberg of what a hoax the official 9/11 fantasy story really is. I have studied it for many countless hours, analyzing all the evidence. An outstanding 1 hour, 45-minute documentary, 0 Hour, fills out the whole sordid saga. A very comprehensive 5-hour documentary, The New Pearl Harbor, is excellent. On the 13th anniversary of 9/11, the Corbett Report names suspects as a platform for an eventual, real, independent investigation. A brave, highly qualified group of 1,500 architects and engineers has come together to make the public aware of the greatest false flag in modern times ever being pulled off. They deserve our attention. It all goes back to the murder of JFK by the CIA and the Joint Chiefs of Staff, doesn't it? In fact, in their heart of hearts, Americans know the truth. Since the Warren Commission in its annual Gallup poll, a majority of Americans believe the deep state killed Kennedy. A solid majority believe the same deep state was responsible for Martin Luther King's murder. A solid plurality of Americans think there was a cover-up about 9/11. This plurality will surely grow to a majority with the help of groups like Architects and Engineers for 9/11. It's not just Americans who recognize rotten fish when they smell it. My high school daughter was fascinated by all the evidence I showed her and my wife about Charlie Hebdo, so she agreed to watch Zero Hour. She not only watched it, but took it to school and gave it to her theory of knowledge teacher, who in turn showed it to the class. Hats off to the prof. They would have surely been fired had they done that in the United States. The shocking result, my daughter said all the students already knew that 9/11 was perpetrated by the American government, and it is their sense of resignation to do anything about it that I find so disturbing and shameful. My wife, too, was just as telling. After looking at all the evidence about Charlie Hebdo and glancing over at the TV screen and seeing millions of sheeple wearing their T-shirts and holding up their absurd "Je suis Charlie" placards, she said, quote, "Okay, so what can you really do about it?" End of quote. It is this feeling of helplessness that is so damning of the West state of affairs. Our so-called democracy is a hollow mirage. This brings me to the crux of this article. In spite of our evolutionary tendencies to deny and block out unpleasant events, deep down we know our governments and capital are committing very bloody and disastrous false flags. And it is our acquiescence to all these false flags that is giving the princes of power a carte blanche to drive the human race towards a dystopian fascist future. After all, if our leaders can murder their own president and get away with a coup d'etat in Dealey Plaza in broad daylight, they can bring down the 9/11 towers and will surely do much worse, confident of humanity's powerlessness. And it makes the Iraqs, Ukraines, and all the other false flags just that much easier for them to pull off. Until we rise up and protest openly against our leaders' false flags, we will have no freedom in our future and probably no future at all. For our very survival, we must, en masse, get informed of the truth and stop saying, "No, it can't be," because it is. False flags is where it all starts and where the nightmare has to end. The princes of power are playing for keeps, and it's either us or them, now or never. Who knows how long Internet freedom and Freedom of Information Act laws will stay on the books? Another 9/11-sized false flag is inevitable, at which point we can kiss goodbye the alternative media and a still relatively open Internet. Okay, I said it. I don't think this article will be appearing in a mainstream newspaper anytime soon. Such is life, but I can live with that. And a postscript. The United States just weighed in as having the 49th most free press in the world, behind Malta, Niger, Burkina Faso, El Salvador, Tonga, Chile, and Botswana. You can rest assured this story will not see the light of day in the mainstream West. Stand tall, America. Stand proud. Then the final section of this article is entitled Alternative News, Information, and Research Sources. Operation Get Smart. In 1807, Thomas Jefferson wrote, "Nothing can now be believed which is seen in a newspaper. Truth itself becomes suspicious by being put into that polluted vehicle. The real extent of this state of misinformation is known only to those who are in situations to confront facts within their knowledge with the lies of the day." Well, President Jefferson, that was great advice to us all 2 centuries later. The disinformation, propaganda, and myth-making has never stopped. So quit flagellating yourself by wasting time accessing the mainstream media. You know they are marionettes for the 1%, and that includes PBS, NPR, and BBC. When I stopped, I felt like I got off bad drugs. My mind cleared, and I could think objectively again. At the end of the day, whose voice has the most credibility? The world's victimized 80% or the West aggressor 15, in parentheses, 20% if you throw in vassal Japan, South Korea, and the other usual suspects. Instead, use that time to read the following books as weapons of truth to combat Western empire. All three are exhaustively researched and referenced. Like William Blake's Cleansed Doors of Perception, they literally changed my life. The first book is JFK and the Unspeakable by James W. Douglas. This was the American deep state's first great false flag, a coup d'etat that changed the world for worse, much worse. Our slippery slope started here. The next book is NATO's Secret Armies, Operation Gladio and Terrorism in Western Europe by Danielle Ganser. A gripping, sordid account of how NATO has killed, assassinated, maimed, and terrorized thousands of their own European citizens and leaders, while overthrowing a few more, and most assuredly still are. And then Killing Hope by William Bloom. It's all here, a detailed dirty laundry list of the CIA's endless coups, assassinations, psyops, mainstream propaganda, destabilization, running drugs, partnering with the mafia, ad nauseum across the four corners of the planet. The heart of the deep state. Then the rest of the article lists, has a long list of hyperlinks to some of the best alternative websites so that you can seek the truth. Thank you. This is Jeff Brown in Beijing, and have a great day.